If you've ever picked up an instrument, you know this feeling. On one hand, you've got the absolute joy of making music, and on the other, you have the sometimes soul-crushing grind of technical practice. It's this universal struggle, right? This tension between the passion that drew you in and the discipline you need to get good. So today, we're diving right into that, the musician's dilemma.
And listen, this isn't just about getting bored. This quote from music student Claudio Guerra, it just says it all. He actually uses the word trauma to talk about his relationship with technical exercises. I mean, that's such a powerful and honest way to put it. It shows that for a lot of people, the path to getting better can feel like it's actually damaging their love for music.
And that really gets us to the heart of the matter for this whole explainer. Is it possible? Can the very thing we do to get better, the scales, the drills, that endless repetition, can it actually stamp out the creative fire it's supposed to be fueling? It's a question that honestly applies to learning pretty much any skill, not just music.
To figure out why this happens, you kind of have to look at this idea called the virtuoso paradigm. It's this deep, deep tradition in music that says the number one goal is technical perfection. Playing faster, cleaner, and more perfectly than anybody else. Educator Cecilia Cavalieri Franza says this pressure can twist the beautiful act of learning into something she just calls mere training.
And here's what happens because of that. France's research showed that when students are only judged on how well they can nail really hard pieces, we might be totally missing their real musical smarts. They could have these amazing creative ideas inside them, but if they're tripping over the mechanics, we never get to hear it. It's like their musicianship is trapped behind this giant wall of technical demands. Okay, so that's the problem. It's a big one. But here's the pivot. What if we just reframed the whole thing? What if getting good technically wasn't the separate, sterile thing you had to do? What if the exercise itself was the music? And that very question leads us to this incredibly elegant solution from an amazing composer. He's really the hero of our story today, the Brazilian composer César Garapeixe, and his genius collection of guitar pieces called the Brevis. Now, Garapeixe was, a brilliant musician, but his whole philosophy was so wonderfully down to earth. He was a firm believer that great art could actually be simple to play and understand. His biographer even said that Garapeixe didn't want to be a genius, but shelved composer. He wanted his music to be played, not just admired from a distance. So in 1981, he wrote the Breves, these short, accessible pieces made specifically for students. And this table just perfectly shows his whole approach. I mean, look at these titles. These aren't called Finger Exercise Number 1 or Scale Drill in C Major. No way. They're called Joyful Prelude, Brief Song, Slurs, Natural Harmonics. Every single one is a tiny, complete musical suite built to teach a specific technique, but it's always, always framed as music first. So what Garapeixe did was create a direct challenge to the old way of thinking. And this sets up a really fascinating showdown between two completely different philosophies on how you build skill. One that sees it as pure gymnastics and another that sees it as artistry from the get-go. So on the one hand, you've got the old way, this idea of pure technique. The focus there is all on the physical stuff, the repetitive motion, totally separate from any real musical idea. But then you have the Garapeixe way, what we can call artistic technique. Here, the focus is immediately on things like phrasing and tone and sound. The technique is baked right into a melody, so you're making a complete musical statement from the very first note you play. And if you think I'm exaggerating that whole gymnastics idea, you have got to hear this quote. This is from Osvaldo Soares, who was a big proponent of the famous, very traditional Tárrega method for guitar. He literally, and I mean literally, wrote that when practicing exercises, the student should not be concerned with anything but the gymnastics. It's the perfect summary of that whole idea of separating the machine from the music. So how does this all actually play out when you sit down to practice? Well, let's look at a direct head-to-head comparison and see for ourselves. Okay, let's take one skill, ligados, or slurs on the guitar. The Soares exercise on the left, it's pure mechanics. It's a finger pattern you just repeat over and over. The only goal is to train the muscles. But look at Garapeixe's piece, Ligaduras. It teaches the exact same physical motion, but it's inside a musical phrase with a bass line and chords and everything. The goal isn't just to move your fingers, it's to create a beautiful melodic line that leads somewhere. One's a drill, the other is a complete musical thought.
And this right here, this is the absolute key to everything. The physical movement the player has to do is identical in both cases, but the purpose, the intention behind that movement is just worlds apart. Garapesce isn't telling students to forget about technique. He's just redefining its purpose from the very start to be inherently and unavoidably musical. So this brings us all the way back to the big picture and the real goal of all this work. What are we actually trying to do when we sit down to practice? Well, the Garapesce philosophy gives us some really clear answers. First, technique is the servant, never the master. It always has to serve artistry. Second, simple doesn't mean shallow. Simple pieces can be incredibly profound. Third, we learn best when we're actually engaged in enjoying ourselves. And finally, the goal at the end of the day isn't just to have fast fingers, it's to be an expressive, meaningful musician. And this isn't just one composer's cool idea from the past. Modern research totally backs this up. Remember the educator we mentioned earlier, Cecilia Cavalieri-Franza? She concluded that finding this balance between musical understanding and technique isn't just a nice to have, it's essential. They have to grow together. You can't have one race ahead of the other without things getting out of whack. So if you're going to take away one thing from all of this, let it be this simple but pretty profound idea. The best, most effective, most sustainable, and frankly, most joyful way to practice is by making music, right from the very beginning. Every scale can be a phrase, every arpeggio can be a melody, and every single exercise can be a song. And I'll just leave you with this last thought. The next time you sit down to practice anything at all, music, a sport, a new language, whatever it is, ask yourself this one question. Am I just training my fingers, or am I learning to speak?